Let's begin now.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Fantasy Golf Bag Podcast. I'm your host, Red Kachik, and this evening we got a special guest. We have Axis away on vacation / bachelor party life with Skylar of the Golf Gurus. So Axis is he was unavoidably detained, and we were not able to get him on the podcast for this Monday night. I think he's actually headed back to Michigan. But congrats to Skylar as well for his bachelor party. He was at Daytona 500. So hopefully he survived that and is able to make it back home. But with one door closing, another one opens. We have Mr. Chris Ferriter at C Ferriter, and I don't remember the last part of your handle on Twitter. You can give that out, man. But happy to have you on, man. Longtime Fantasy Golf Bag member, huge supporter of the DFS community on Twitter, etc. I saw your likes today on your DK tweet got up to like 30 or 40. I think people like that stuff. But how's everything going for you, man?
Everything is good, Drew. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm sure I was like the 6th or 7th call. But I will try to fill in for Sky and Axis and Jacob the best I can. So my DK tweet did get some action. It looks like they put the 153 max in there. A little bit smaller than last year, but hopefully it just keeps getting bigger. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, very good. And from my understanding, obviously, to take a step back, Fantasy Golf Bag, obviously we had a new app that came out last week. We're going to continue to add on features for like the showdown model and stuff like that, but huge success. I mean, Crack Drafter's been doing great. Ronnie Lee, even Orange Man won something a couple weeks ago in showdown. But man, how's your kind of start to the season? I know you had a newborn, but it looks like you had a good week last weekend. How's everything been going so far in the 2020 season for you?
Yeah, it's been okay. Last week I did very good on the betting side. I bet Scott outright before it started, and then I parlayed him on, I think, Saturday night when everyone was convinced Rory would win. And then I actually, going back to the app, final round, I entered my first showdown of the season, and I 5x my entry fee. So I'm thinking that might be a little avenue for us to explore as the season keeps going. But everything's been good, man. How's everything with you?
Yeah, been good. It's definitely, to be honest, it's definitely been rough as far as getting into a groove in contest selection with the different tournaments. I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, like when the tournament champions rolled around, just like obviously the season starts in the fall, but you really view it as January for tournament champions. Then Sony. You kind of you want to get into a groove of reserving. If you play cash, you want to get into a habit of getting your cash lineups out there, or your contests out there for people to take, reserving your cash entries, your 50-50s, your triple ups, etc., and then getting your tournament lineups in. And then it starts rolling into like the Farmers and the Desert Classic and the AT&T with all these course rotations. And it's, for me, and especially on a content side, it's tough because you got these different courses, but then you just. For me, I can't invest in cash when it's like all these course rotations. So trying to get into a groove is really tough. But I think now we kind of hit the stretch. We don't have a course rotation this week, but it's a limited field. So take that with what it's worth. You probably don't want to play cash. But then we roll right into the Honda and the full Florida swing. There's no course rotations. It's a beauty. And then we go into the Masters and all the majors. It's like this is the prime time for the season. This is where you kind of get your groove as far as your process, your contest selection, etc. It hasn't been a bad start to the year, to be honest, but it's definitely, week to week, it's like, all right, what am I going to do this week? Which I hate because I really like sticking to a process of waking up Monday, figuring out what the, what the deal is with cash versus GPPs, etc. But excited for this week and kind of moving forward into the Florida swing, obviously being in Florida as well as you in the South Florida region. But yeah, this is like the prime time for me to kind of get started for the full season of golf.
Yeah, it kind of feels like we got one more week to get through, and then it really starts to normalize, which I'm excited for as well.
Correct. Yep. So, without further ado, again, you can find the Fantasy Golf Bag app. It's completely free on the App Store. It's only available for iPhone right now, but if you go and find Fantasy Golf Bag or search Fantasy Golf Bag on the App Store, you can find it. And again, it has all the showdown data, live strokes gained. It'll be for this week. It's got the WGC. The Puerto Rico Open doesn't have strokes gained, but it does have the traditional stats, which will be available in the app. So you can be playing showdown lineups for either event all weekend, and then for the rest of the season. So with that, we'll try to keep this thing rolling, similar to the last couple weeks with Axis, and we'll roll into the course for the WGC Mexico, and then we'll walk through our players and kind of like some top names. Obviously, a limited field, almost everyone's in play. Even if you look at last year's data for GPPs, there's a lot of pros that are 60 man player pools, and it's a 70 man player pool event basically. So we'll go ahead and look at the course profile for the Mexico Championship. Again, you can find this at fantasygolfbag.com/podcast. It's being played at Club de Golf Chapultepec in Mexico City. I think it's played at about 7,400 feet above sea level. So the ball flies about 8.5% further. It's a par 71, 7,345 yards. The green is going to be POA mixed with bent. Fairways are going to be Kikuya, and the rough is also Kikuya. Scoring average last year, 70.86, so just about a half a stroke under par. Driving accuracy, 58%. Driving distance, 303. Kind of alludes to the elevation there. And honestly, we'll probably talk about it, how the guys approach this golf course. Green regulation, super high at 67%. Proximity at 37 feet. And approach average at 148 feet. So just looking at the overall golf course, again, you have strokes gain data, so you can go into our historical strokes gain tool and look up last year. Obviously, Dustin Johnson won. He gained 8.5 strokes putting. And we kind of talked about this. We talk about this a lot in the Fantasy Golf Bag Slack with POA splits. Like, guys that putt well on POA tend to putt really well on POA, and guys that don't putt well. Like, it's different than most surfaces, Bermuda, bent, etc. So looking at guys that have actually putt well on POA in the past is definitely a key. But if you look at how these guys gain their strokes, a lot of them were on approach and off the tee like a normal week. They approach it differently. Dustin last year, I think he was driving like 3 or 4 greens on the par 4s around. Like it's absurd for how far they hit some of these tee shots. So for me personally, it's a very standard week in terms of like key stats. You look at course history, you look at recent form. So I throw in strokes gained total, etc. But with the elevation, I think people, talk up apex and different things. It's honestly, for me, a pretty standard week, just trying to figure out which line of construction avenues you want to go through in each of the different tiers for pricing. That's really the challenge. Like, obviously, the guys at the top all look great. As you move down with softer pricing, you have a lot of different ways to go. But there's really no difference, I don't think, unless you have any different takes there, Chris, on how you approach this golf course. Birdies should be made off the tee. Approach are definitely keys. It's mostly a standard PGA Tour event. You just got a better field.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, 21 under won it last year, so you're gonna have to go low. So I'm basically looking overall exact same stat categories you're looking at.
Yeah. So last year, DJ won at 21 under. Phil in 2018 against JT, who had the miraculous hole out on 18. They finished at 16 under par, and then DJ again in 2017 at 14 under par. So definitely a little bit lower scoring than we saw last week. Obviously, Riviera super tough. But yeah, birdies galore, all categories, man. If you're really going to make cuts in your player pool, putting splits would be like the number one thing to cut someone out or bump someone up. But overall, for the most part, these guys should grade out pretty well near the top if you're looking at strokes gain approach, off the tee, etc., which is really what I'm looking at. I'm not looking at any type of par 5, par 4 splits. You really, you're going to see some crazy high condensed ownership. You're really just trying to navigate as best you can of picking out the top range who you want to go with. Obviously, Rory, DJ, which we'll talk about here in a second, are tough ones to determine between the two. And then as you go in the 8, 7K range, that's really where you're going to make your lineup construction for GPPs this week. So if you don't have anything else on the course, Chris, we'll go ahead and dive into the players. We'll start in the 10K range and we'll work our way down, kind of hitting on high points. Obviously, a smaller field of 72 guys. and a lot of which we have. Skyler again is in Daytona for his bachelor party. He's headed back, I think, tonight. So hopefully he has the rolling stats up. I'm sure he'll include some of the Euro stats, which is super helpful for guys like Kinnolt, Abear, Westwood, Ryan Fox, etc. So keep an eye on those as you try to navigate the 6K range. But yeah, we'll start with the 10K range. We got Rory, DJ, Justin Thomas, John Rahm, and Matsuyama kind of rounding out that top side. Obviously, DJ's got incredible course history. First place, seventh place, first place. He's a WGC master. I forget how many WGCs he's won now. He's got to be close to double digits. But for me, it'd be really going to Rory. Finishing second last year, seventh in 2017. In all the stat categories, he's been the most consistent over the last 6 months versus a DJ or a Rahm even. Like even Rahm last week, you could probably look at the last couple weeks for Rahm. He hasn't really been playing as well tee to green as you would hope for a guy that's essentially expected to win. So for me, it's really tough to go back to like a JT after how bad he played last week. That's probably a mistake on my part. I'll probably have some exposure. But yeah, Rory in the top range is probably first. And then Hideki definitely stands out. Like he seems like the one guy, as consistent as the other guys are. Hideki probably seems as the guy that's trending more up than anybody here.
Yeah, I agree. I think Hideki will be, in terms of ownership, will be the interesting sort of one to look at. What he made the cut on the number and then went on that run, and I think he finished top 5 maybe. But I think top 5 after making the cut on the number. So he went super low over the weekend. So it'll be interesting to see what people do with that. I think the guy that I'm interested in is going to be Dustin Johnson. A first, a seventh, and a first his last 3 times here. And I honestly, I think people get or emotionally overreact to some of these things as they roster these players. Like last week, the internet was going crazy as if DJ was playing horrendously. But if you look, he gained strokes in all categories overall. He's figuring it out on the greens. You can obviously tell that. But a guy that can drive the golf ball like that and sort of seems to be getting better and better each week, I just don't think I can ignore his course history. And I'm hoping his ownership is down just because people got him so into his round and just felt like he was leaving strokes out there. So we'll see what happens there. But he's the guy that I look at immediately in that range.
Yeah, DJ, it's hard to argue against him, obviously, with his course history, but I do think he's playing better. I think people talked up a little bit of his knee injury and having surgery at the end of last year, and then Brooks, obviously. But, yeah, for Dustin Johnson, just looking at last year, you look at his ball striking stats, he gained about 3.6 strokes ball striking, he gained 1.5 strokes putting, and even going back to, like, Pebble Beach, which is we only have 2 rounds for the POA. He struggled a bit off the tee and approach, but you see a little bounce back last week. So he's another one of those where I wouldn't get too caught up on the recent form. Like if you look through his recent stats, it doesn't look great, but you have to keep in mind he's coming off a knee injury. I do think he's probably more on the uptrend, getting geared up for the whole year than some of the other guys in this range. So if ownership, honestly, in this type of field, ownership is going to be the biggest dictator. If you're building a bunch of lineups, you're going to be looking for leverage. If you're building a single entry, then maybe you pick your favorite guy. If you're really leaning towards DJ or really leaning towards Rory, you go that direction. But yeah, the ownership should be high for everybody, but it should be pretty condensed up here. So if you do see DJ or Rory, even Rahm, I guess, getting a huge amount of ownership, look to go the other way in GPPs, because in a 72-man field, that's really the leverage you want to get, which is very unique. And like I mentioned at the top of the show, it's not going to be a cash week for me for that exact reason, because if you miss one of these guys, it's kind of game over. And it's not over until Sunday, because everyone, even if you play terrible and Thursday, Friday, like Hideki last week, they got 2 more rounds to make it up, and you end up finishing 5th. So you're never dead, and you're never completely winning, which is a really tough deal for cash, in my opinion. So let's look a bit at the 9K range. So I got a couple guys in the 9K and 8K range. I think that's where a lot of people will tend to start their lineups. If you're using Optimizer, it'll probably tend to go towards the balanced route. For me, I have no issue going back to Adam Scott after his win last year. We haven't seen him play this event since the inception in 2017. He finished 45th. But man, his ball striking stats last week looked great. Even like looking at our Spectrum data versus what he recorded for the PGA Tour, he gained 1.5 strokes or 1.7 strokes on approach per round. For me, even off of a win, which granted, that was a tough win for him to kind of endure as far as the conditions go. He kind of struggled on Sunday. I think he's fine going back to. The other two that I have marked in this range is Xander, strictly off of ownership. I have to assume he's going to be lower owned, at least from the tone of our Slack chat. People despise Xander's performance last week and the last couple weeks with his putting. But I have no issues with him. 14th place last year, 18th place 2 years ago. I think he's a better player. And on POA, we've seen anything can happen. And he actually gained strokes. I think you mentioned in our chat he gained 3.5 strokes on the weekend putting. So that's a really good sign. Yeah. And then the last one I'll mention here is Tommy Fleetwood, 9,200. We haven't seen him play in a while on the PGA Tour. He's been playing on the European Tour. He's played fine his last two finishes, a second place, 11th place. But I think his consistency just stands out. And he's got to be due for a win. I have no issue going back to Tommy Fleetwood. Second place, 14th place, 19th place his last 3 years here. I think, there's probably some other avenues you can go, but those are my main targets I'm looking at. And I wouldn't be surprised if Adam Scott's lower owned than you would expect coming off of a win just because of his lack of course history.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. The two guys I was actually going to mention are Adam Scott and Xander Schauffele. Adam Scott just looked fantastic stat-wise last week, and I see no reason why he couldn't keep that up. And then, like you said, going back to the emotional thing, I just think Xander, his stats were actually better than people think he was. And if you look, I think he went 2 under, rounds 3 and 4, which is, some of the better rounds, at least round 4. I think the best round was 3 under last week. So he was right up there. It was just his putting that held him back in the first couple rounds, but historically, he's a good POA putter. And I think that's something to go back to and hope that he regresses towards his mean. And the other one that is of interest to me is at 9,800, Webb Simpson. Just because the last time we saw him, he won the Waste Management. So I'll be curious to see if people are talking about him. I think he's an interesting pivot. I haven't deep dived much into his stats, but obviously I think his last 3 finishes are a first, a third, and a 10th since the beginning of December. So he's obviously playing some great golf right now. So he's of interest to me as well.
Yeah, so the only issue that I had with Webb, and I looked at him too, because obviously he's been probably the most under-recognized players on the PGA Tour for the last year and a half or so. At least since he's won the Players' Championship, and obviously coming off a win, he would garner some interest. But this golf course, and like I mentioned, strokes gained approach off the tee, both in play as far as key stats. But off the tee definitely bodes well for doing well here. And when I look back at why he hasn't played well, he's basically finished middle of the pack each of the last 2 years. He doesn't gain a lot of strokes off the tee. So I don't know if he's just like one-sided as far as like hitting his draw and he can't shape it or hit it over the trees, whatever. Because like DJ plays this course completely different. Rory played it completely different. JT plays it completely different. So like last year, Webb lost 3 strokes off the tee. So obviously just 2 years of data for Webb at this event. And I don't want to take him off or talk him off of you or talk you off of him. But yeah, just trying to figure out a reason why he hasn't played well, and strokes gained off the tee definitely seems like it. Because even in normal events, man, he's not really gaining a lot of strokes off the tee. He's no DJ, Rahm, McIlroy, etc. So I think that might be the reason, especially if he gets talked up. Hopefully, I mean, honestly, for me, hopefully he does. That's probably the reason why he hasn't played very well here, just because the tee shot to get in position and scramble and make a lot of birdies is most important. And he just doesn't do it very much.
Makes a lot of sense, actually.
Just throwing that out there. I mean, honestly, he could probably win on any golf course he wants to, but how those guys play it versus him, losing 3 strokes off the tee on an elevation-style golf course like this the last 2 years is a little bit alarming and probably more of a trend than just like a fluke. So that's kind of how I view it. I probably won't be playing any Webb. So let's go down to the 8K. Again, it's a stacked field. You could, pick and choose a lot of guys in this 9K range to start with. 8K range is similar boat. There's a couple guys I got circled, but I'll let you lead off in this tier. Any that really stand out to you? Obviously, there's some good kind of cash-type players. Guys have been very, very consistent. Some guys that are always kind of uneasy to click, but have a ton of upside. So where are you kind of looking at in this range?
So the first name that sort of stuck out to me, which is sort of odd because I never really play this guy much, is Sergio Garcia, actually.
Yes.
He actually, I mean, his putter was horrendous last week, but otherwise he's been, he was great off the tee. He was great on approach around the green. Tee to green was, 6 strokes tee to green, and then he just lost 4 strokes putting. And he has fantastic course history here. If I'm looking at this, he has finished. Hold on, let me find him in here here we go. He is finished 6th, 7th, and 12th in 3 starts. So, that's something you can't argue against.
No, and real quick, just not to cut you off, but
go ahead, please.
We didn't touch on it too much, but there has been comparisons as far as this course in the elevation to other elevation-style golf courses like Switzerland, which is another player down here, which we'll talk about, Mr. Fitzpatrick. But guys like Sergio that have played a lot over there in the Alps, that have played in Spain, etc., on different types of elevation-style courses, they tend to play well here. So Paul Casey kind of in the same boat. So keep an eye on that too. If you do want to, we try not to throw out too many course comps, but if you do want to look at event comps, guys that have played well in elevation tend to play well here, at least on the European Tour. We don't get it a lot on the PGA Tour for different reasons, but just to kind of allude to your point, Sergio, he's played really well here, and he's played well in those style courses over on the European Tour. The ball striking stands out. Putting is horrendous, like you said. But it's hard not to ignore a guy that, he's going to gain 5 strokes ball striking probably. Hopefully he loses half a stroke putting. That'd be great. But yeah, he looks extremely solid, and course history backs it up. Yeah,
absolutely. And then you kind of stole the other guy if you want to run with him, but Paul Casey, just, looking at him, he's got a 3, a 12, and a 16. Finished, I think, 37th last week, but made the weekend and had a little bit of a run on Saturday, but I think Sunday he kind of blew up. But
and this is his 3rd event now playing in a row. And I don't have his last couple years pulled up to look at how he trends going forward, but it definitely seems like he plays better the more rounds he gets under his belt. So 37th last week, 64th the week before. And he's played this event 3 times, which again, if someone's played this event multiple times, seen this golf course, which is somewhat unique, that's a positive. But I do think, and I'm not pulling up the numbers this year, but last year we kind of talked about the Apex data. Paul Casey is like top 10 in that list, and he's been the top 10 in that list every single year. A guy that hits it very high, tends to have an advantage at altitude. Obviously, a 3rd place last year, 12th the year before, is kind of backs it up a bit. But yeah, I have no issue with Paul Casey. Gain strokes. We have him for our Spectrum data, 1.5 strokes per round last week, so 4.8 strokes for the event. Pretty good as a trend coming into this week. Any others in this 8K range? Otherwise, I'll pick up the last 2 that I got.
No, please go right ahead. Those were the 2 that I've been looking at.
So I was hesitant at first to pick up rookies, and not rookies in the sense of like a rookie on the PGA Tour, but rookie in terms of playing this event for the first time. It's obviously only been played here the last 3 years, so the first year everyone It was their first look at the golf course. But Colin Morikawa is a guy that I really have a tough time quitting until he
I knew you were going to say Colin Morikawa.
I just don't know how you can overlook him. He gains strokes off the tee. He doesn't gain a ton. The last couple of events, he's put up mediocre finishes at higher than, we'll say his price was higher than the value that he output for the finishes that he made. But 21st place at the Sony, 21st at Farmers, 25th at the Waste Management, 26th last week. He gained 7 strokes ball striking in the last 2 events. That's really what I'm looking for. Again, you kind of, in this type of field, you really want top 5 equity for his price range, which I think he can do. Honestly, man, he won the Barracuda elevation, so I don't want to put that narrative out there, but that is, somewhat important for a guy to be able to adjust to altitude like that. Colin Morikawa is just a stud, and as long as he's not priced out of range, like if he was priced up near an Adam Scott, Hideki, etc., it makes you think twice about it. But down here where he's at in this low mid 8K range, I got no issues going back to Colin Morikawa. He's one of the safest ones, I think. Even in a no-cut event, everyone's technically safe. But man, his stats are just so consistent week after week. I have no issue with plugging Morikawa in here. I think he has upside for a top 5, if not a win, if he really starts putting well, which we haven't seen him putt well since like the end of last year.
Yeah, I agree. He actually made a run last week too, on Sunday, and I don't know if you saw, but he put up an 8 triple on on like 12 or 13 and just kind of killed his day. But the kid's a stud, honestly. So I like that play. I don't know how never seeing the course is going to affect him, but I do like that take.
That's the tough part, and I just don't know of a way to quantify it, is like seeing the course for the first time, traveling to Mexico maybe for the first time, or at least to this event. That's kind of the tough part. So we'll see how it plays out. I still think if you're looking at data, it's really tough for me to overlook him. The last guy that I'll mention down here is Fitzpatrick. He has the same Switzerland narrative, kind of like Sergio. He gained 1.5 strokes per round last week. Very consistent. And if you look through his finishes here, they've been mediocre at best. But I think at his price, there's a lot of upside. He's finished 16th, 30th, and 27th. I like him a lot for upside. He's kind of, in a ball striking sense, trending upward. His putter has not been there. He's had a couple fluky rounds, in my opinion. But they're at the bottom of the 8K range. He's probably the last guy that I'll be plugging in this tier. And there's no Jordan Spieth in my future, but yeah, Fitzpatrick's fine. There's plenty of other ones, like I said. In GPPs this week, the whole field is wide open, trying to gain leverage. But those are the main guys that I'm really focusing this week.
Love it.
All right, let's drop down to the 7K range, and I'll kind of skip over the high tier here and hit on the middle range. So I'm sure if Golf Gurus, if Skylar was here with his Euro sheets, he'd be talking up Victor Perez, which probably will get some love from me this week in terms of GPPs. He's gone 2nd, 16th, 38th over on the European Tour. Extremely solid. And that 16th was like a terrible, like I think he shot like 80 the last day. This terrible wind. He had a chance to win that one. So second, first would have been pretty nice on the scorecard coming in this week. But yeah, Victor Perez, probably the one guy from the European Tour that I'll allude that Skylar would be talking about. But Graham McDowell is really interesting to me. If you look through his stats coming in this week, he's been extremely consistent. He's got 2 missed cuts, but if you look through like our Spectrum data, he's been one of the most consistent guys over the last 5 events. And now my computer froze up. Terrific. Good timing. Let's see here.
Honestly, I'd love to jump in for you, but the 7K range for me is like sort of like a no man's land right now.
That's fine. I mean, honestly, man, you got, so just to finish off on McDowell, gained just under a stroke per round last week at the Genesis for the Spectrum data. Same thing at the Sony. So been very consistent. He obviously won over there in Saudi Arabia. He's in good form in my opinion, and he hasn't played this event, but I like his chances adapting. He's a world-class player. Won the U.S. Open, etc. I like his chances on POA. On a course where approach should be pretty important, the tee shots are a little bit iffy. That's probably my only pause, but I do like him quite a bit. I doubt he'll be very heavily owned. The other couple that I'll try to sell you on, Bobby Mack, Robert McIntyre, that everybody...
shout out to Sky and Access.
Yes, but, the dude is good. High hopes for him, but he's going to play well. He's had a lot of good finishes. On the European Tour, I think he was Rookie of the Year or tied or something like that with, I forget who was in that category with him last year, but the dude's been incredibly consistent. So Robert McIntyre from Scotland is on the list. Scotty Scheffler and Charles Howell round up the bottom tier. Scheffler obviously bouncing back last week off of a missed cut, or two missed cuts. Just letting everybody down, but I like Scotty Scheffler, and then Charles Howell played extremely well, tee to green last week. So I think that bodes well for his chances on a golf course, just looking at guys that are spiking a bit off of last week. So as the year rolls on, I'll look more towards longer-term, stats and trends. But when you get these guys that haven't played since, the Sony or the Desert Classic or something, looking for like really near-term results, for me, typically leads to better success. As an example, like a Charles Howell, where he shot, I think, 6 under on Friday and played relatively well over the weekend, and then kind of gave it all back on Sunday and finished 59th. So played here last year, finished 14th. That's probably the last guy in the 7K range that I'll mention.
Do you have any interest in going back to Abraham Ancer at all? Started out 5 over last week and then ended up making the cut and kind of just middled around.
I would say normally yes. His POA splits aren't very good. His Mexico narrative is good, except for he hasn't played well at this event. So I don't know what the deal is. I assume, like for me, I would probably exclude him, but I wouldn't be surprised if he played well. Like he's been surpassing everybody's expectations, winning on the Australian Open or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. So I probably won't be going back to him just because of his course history. There's something about altitude maybe that's bothered him. He's pretty much grown up in the States. So you going back to any Ancer this week?
I'll give him a second look for sure.
His stats aren't bad. It's just coming down here. For me, there's a fine line between like, oh yeah, let me play the guy that screwed everybody the week before, or should I go back to, this guy's stats been looking great, but he hasn't played this event very well. Maybe there's a reason for that. Let's just take that one out.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, his course history is not good, so.
And it seems like a course history course. I mean, if you look through some of these guys' finishes, man, they've been very, very similar. Yeah,
over and over. Yeah, agreed.
So it's just a unique golf course. So let's go down into the 6K range. I know you mentioned you didn't have a ton of guys. The only course, or I guess the country narrative that I have interest in is Mr. Carlos Ortiz.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was great for us last week.
He was. He gained 3 strokes putting, which most people would probably shake their head at. But 2 strokes on approach. He lost about a stroke off the tee. He's been playing well since the fall swing, man. And I like his chances going down to Mexico. Obviously a home country game, whatever it is. There's something to be said for Carlos Ortiz playing down here with as well as he's been playing. 25th, 26th, his last 2 starts. I think he's made like 6 of his last 7 cuts, and 3 of those were top 10s. So Carlos Ortiz, I have a lot of interest in. Lanto Griffin is down here, 6,700. I have interest in. And that's pretty much it. I looked through the bottom range. I had interest in Justin Harding, which I don't think is the worst thing. He's 6,200. But there's really not anyone down here that I think has enough upside to warrant even a really extreme stars and scrubs lineup. I don't see any of these guys finishing inside the top 30 or top 25.
Yeah, I made a note to ask Sky and Access about Matt Wallace.
He's been bad, man.
Yeah, he's been playing terribly.
Yeah, and I mean, this is probably something for another pod. I didn't realize he was at a point like a couple of years ago of giving up golf, and we hear this all the time of guys, almost giving up golf. But I always thought he was some phenom that came up and everything was easy for him, and he got on the European tour and did great. But apparently he came from nothing and was struggling and almost lost his card and all this stuff. And now he's playing really tough. I mean, it's a side note at this point, but I thought that was super impressive for a guy that basically was going to go work in a pro shop and then get into all these WGCs is pretty impressive. But yeah, he's been playing bad. He's got a couple made cuts on the European tour, but if you look at our stats on the website, they have not been very much attributed to tee to green. It's been a lot of around the green and putting, which I don't want to rely on this week.
No, absolutely not.
Lorenzo Vera is probably the one interesting one. I mean, he's got the most upside of all the weird Europeans. And I don't mean weird as them being European, but like the no-name PGA Tour guys, the average fan won't recognize some of these guys. Mike Lorenzo Vera is probably the one guy on the list at 6,400 that he doesn't have winning upside, but if he finished in the top 10, you'd be like, yeah, he's been playing really well. He's long enough. He hits a lot of greens in regulation on the European Tour. There's something to be said for MLV this week in GPPs.
Yeah, it's kind of there's not a ton down here, so it'll be interesting to see how people build this week because, last year it was Rory and DJ with the fireworks show against each other. So it'll be interesting to see if people are trying to jam two people up top and just.
I think that'll probably end up winning a GPP, to be honest. Like, if you had 150 lineups to throw in there, having a Rory, McIlroy, and DJ lineup, or Rory, JT, any of those two combinations, and then a couple scrubs, and then you get the right scrub that finishes in the top
10
15,
or something.
Yeah, that'll get you through it. So I think, again, optimally, no, you don't need anybody down here. But if you're going to win a huge GPP, yeah, you need to pick an uncomfortable guy. The issue is you got to figure out which two you want to throw in there because you can't play just one. You need like a min price guy, 6,200 or lower, 6,400 and lower, and then one other 6K guy, and then you're trying to jam in two or three studs. So that'll probably be what wins the GPP, but it's just tough to figure out if you're building a few lineups, which scrub is going to end up in the top 15. So that's where the 150 lineups comes in and why the guys that throw in that many, and MME have a big advantage in this type of field.
And then just on a general note, are you weighting DK points more this week just because it's a no cut, or how are you approaching it?
No, not really. So DK points obviously is mostly attributed to birdies. We have weighted DK points, I think, for the European Tour. But again, it's against the European Tour on those fields. So for me, I wouldn't be weighting anything that has more like course strength built into it. It's just more, for me, I'd be viewing the PGA Tour guys separately and then picking out 3 or 4 guys from the European Tour that are, more or less no names. And those would be the guys in my player pool. So I would view them separately, not just in one big batch of like who gains the most DK points against the field, just because it can be a little bit, if you view that on the European Tour, you might see that Bobby Mack is number 3 on the list, which is obviously not very accurate. And I don't know that's true. It's just he could very well be like top 5 on the list in DK points gained, and you wouldn't put him above JT or something like that. So keep that in mind when you're comparing the the European Tour versus the PGA Tour. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got for the 6K range, man. It's going to be a fun week, I think, for builds. This kind of reminds me of the WGC coming up in a month and a half or so for the match play, because that's Sky's bread and butter with the different groupings and stuff like that. But yeah, this is like the first taste of this limited field, getting ready for the Masters. Build some Stars and Scrubs lineups, man, and have some fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. Actually, it'll be fun to go back and see what the optimal lineup was for this thing, because I think the 7K and the 6K are going to be
it'll be key.
Quite tough.
Yeah, what sucks though is watching through Sunday, because Thursday through Sunday everything's going to change and flip flops, and that's always the frustrating part. So, but yeah,
everybody's live. That's the problem.
Exactly, everyone's live and no one's dead. So we'll deal with it though. We'll have fun, and I'm sure plenty of people in chat. Orange Man Rap, you guys will have plenty to tilt about Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I'm sure. So we'll have an interactive Slack chat all weekend long. So that'll pretty much do it, man. I appreciate you, Chris, coming on. Good luck with the baby. Good luck at the DFS Open this next weekend. But any final thoughts for the crowd in the WGC Mexico Championship?
No, not really. I mean, have fun with it. It's everybody plays 4 days, so it's a whole different beast. There's no cut, and honestly, these are the kind of events that I try and scale it back a little bit.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, Saturday you could be up $5,000, and Sunday you're down $1,000. It's just one of those. It's honestly because everybody's still alive on Sunday. So some guy goes and shoots 7 under who no one was thinking about, and the whole board is flipped. So one of those weeks I would take it easy, gear up for the Florida swing, and it kind of feels like that's when the real season's going to start, and it's going to be fun for everybody. So I appreciate you having me on, man. Thank you very much. And best of luck to you with the baby and everything. And if I can help you in any way, let me know, brother.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, this should be the last kind of wonky event. Obviously, no course rotation, but the limited field does make it a little bit different than the full Florida swings events that we're going to have coming up here soon. So, as always, everybody, thank you for tuning in to the Fantasy Golf Bag podcast this week. If you could leave us a rating and a review on iTunes, that always goes a long way. But we appreciate you tuning in. We'll be back Wednesday night for the PGA DFS live stream on twitch.tv/redkachik. That's me and Jacob. And look forward to having some fun sweats all weekend. Hopefully some plenty of showdown contests, I'm sure. But good luck, guys. Appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you later this week for the DFS live stream Wednesday night. See ya.